Hey you guys, I'm Marielle Ercolano and I'm a sign maker, laser file designer, teacher, and all-around crafter. I love all crafts, therefore I call myself the ultimate craftinista and DIY queen. No one else calls me that, but I do. 6 months ago, I created a group called Glowforge Sign Makers that took off, and it has set me on a file designing, sign making, and teaching journey, which brings me to this course. You have entrusted me to teach you all of my designing ways, and that is exactly what I plan to do. This 4-class course will give you a full breakdown of Procreate, hand lettering, and floral drawing in Procreate, and vectoring our drawings and lettering pieces in Adobe Illustrator so that we can ultimately cut them out on our Glowforges. Whew, that was a mouthful. So whether you want to make files for yourself or to sell, I'm going to teach you exactly how to do it. I'm often asked, how do I get the inspiration for my files? And I always feel like my answer requires an explanation. How do you get inspiration from others without risking copyright infringement and the integrity of your own pieces? How do you come up with perfect, gorgeous florals? At least that's what I think they are. And how do you know exactly how to lay your florals out perfectly? I'll answer all of these questions for you and a lot more in this course. So without delaying any more time, let's just get into it. Alright, so when we first open the Procreate app, this is what you will see, except you won't see all of these art pieces because obviously we're not drawing the same things. When you first download the app, there'll be a few example projects that you'll see in your gallery. Those you can choose to keep there or you can delete them. In order to go into one of your pieces, all you have to do is just click on it. And then in order to go back to the gallery, on the top left-hand side, it says gallery, and you'll just click that and that brings you right back. As you start to accumulate artwork, you'll be able to stack your artwork. So I'll just show you quickly how you can stack. So when I say stack, I mean group artwork together inside of a folder to keep everything organized. So you would just hit on the top right-hand side where it says select, and you can select more than one. So if I select a few pieces, at the top, a few new prompts pop up and it says stack, preview, share, duplicate, or delete. So you can either stack them and group them into one folder, preview them all together, share them, duplicate them, or delete them. So if you hit stack, that puts them all in one folder. And then when you're done stacking, you just hit the X on the top right side. When you go into that folder, you'll see everything that you stacked. And then to go back on the top left-hand side, you just hit where it says stack and it has the arrow pointing to the left. And that will bring you back to the gallery. If you would like to import something, like let's say you had some artwork that you done on the computer, or if you have a practice worksheet for lettering that you wanted to import, at the top right hand side in the middle between the words select and photo, it says import. So you would just hit import, and this is where it will bring up your locations. So the locations consist of, obviously it will depend on whether or not you have a Mac computer hooked up to your iPad or your iCloud, and your computer will be here, your iCloud drive, your iPad drive, Dropbox if you have Dropbox, and then your downloads. So, and then at the bottom, you can toggle between recent. So these are all the things that you recently opened. And then on the right side, browse, which brings you back to the locations, iCloud Drive, iPad, Dropbox, and so on and so forth. So if you wanted to open something, let's say I wanted to open something on my laptop, I would just hit iCloud Drive, and then I can go to my desktop. And then these documents are everything that I have on my desktop right now on my computer or my MacBook. So if I wanted to import, let's say, some flowers that I drew, then I can import them very easily. They also make it very easy for you to import photos straight from your camera roll. So you would just hit photo and it will bring up your camera roll inside of your iPad. Excuse the blurriness, I apologize. So if you go into your photos, you'll be able to just grab something and bring it up quickly. If you look at the top on the right hand side, you'll notice that there's a little plus sign, and this plus sign will bring up all the preset canvases, and this is where you'll create a canvas to start working your art piece on. So if you don't know which one to choose, the best one to start with is the one that says screen size, and this one will create a canvas depending on which iPad you have. It will create a canvas the same size as your iPad. If you want to create a canvas from scratch and change the size yourself, you would just hit this plus sign at the top, and you'll notice that on the left hand side you have the dimensions menu, the color profile, the time-lapse settings, and the canvas properties. So if you go to dimensions, this is where you'll be able to change the size of the width and the height of your canvas in pixels. And then you'll also be able to change the DPI. One thing that you cannot alter is the layers. The layers are altered according to how big your canvas is. The bigger your canvas, the less layers that you are able to work with. The smaller your canvas, the more layers Procreate allows you to work with. And depending on how many gigs of space you have in your iPad, they'll give you more layers or less layers. So if I create a canvas that's about 4,500 by 4,000, my maximum layers will go from the 250 that it once was to 25. So that means that when I go to create an art piece, I'll only be able to create 25 layers. And if I grab my son's iPad and I created the same exact size canvas, because he only has 32 gigs of space versus my 512 gigs of space, if I put exactly the same size canvas in his iPad and the same exact DPI, then his maximum layers will be about 4. And obviously it's very hard to work with only 4 layers. If you want, you can play around with the canvas size, but like I said, the screen size will always be more than big enough for what we need it for. So I'm going to go ahead and click on screen size, and that's going to bring me into the canvas, and this is where all the magic will happen. You'll notice that the camera kind of blurs out a few times, and it's always going to reset and focus. I apologize about that. I think it's because it's pretty dark in here, but if I put on a lot of lights, then you won't really be able to see what I'm doing. So I apologize about that, but as long as you can see what I'm doing, and when I'm doing it, it's in focus. That's all that matters. If you notice on the right hand side, this is where your brush size can be changed. There's these 2 sliders, and one can change the brush size, and then the other one can change the opacity of the brush. And then in the middle, there's this little box here, and this is basically what we would call a color dropper in Adobe Illustrator. And there's a few ways that you can select color, but I'll just show you quickly what it does. So I have a brush selected, and I'll make the brush a bit big, and I'll just create a circle here. Then I'll change the color, and I'll create another one here. So if I grab middle button here that is in the shape of a square, I'll be able to toggle on top of the colors and be able to select the color that's on the screen. So that's one way that you could select colors. Another way that you can do it without having to use that is you would just take your finger and lay it on the color that you want to choose, and it will set your color to the color that you are putting your finger down on. But it takes a second, so you just have to hold it down, and then a box will come around it and you'll be able to select it. If you want to toggle between two colors, you'll notice on the right top side there's a little color circle. So all you would do to toggle between colors is you would just hold on to that circle, and you'll be able to go back and forth between the two colors that you were just using. So in this case, I'm using this orange and this light beige color. So I can toggle between those two colors by just holding on to that circle there. So if you go to the brush menu, which is the first paintbrush here at the top, first button with the paintbrush, you'll notice that this is the brush library, and yours will obviously look a bit different than mine's because I've had Procreate for years now and I've accumulated a lot of brushes over time. But as you become more comfortable with Procreate and start downloading more and more brushes, you'll start to have a lot of brushes in your library. So usually I really only use one main brush to draw, and that is a mono brush. And the brush that I like to use is the brush that I have given you for this course, and that's called the GSM mono brush. There's all different kinds of brushes, and Procreate has a bunch of brushes already preset for you. So if you want, just take a day and just mess around with all the brushes and see if there are any that you really like. You could create another folder, and you can put all your favorite brushes inside of a folder so that you can have them all in one folder and be able to just, you know, flip through them whenever you want to, instead of having to go through all the brushes and try to find them. And then right next to that is the eraser tool. And again, the erasers mimic the brushes. So every brush that you have in your brush library will also be an eraser. I found that the best way to use an eraser is just by using a mono brush. So for every time I want to erase something, I just grab the mono brush, the GSM mono brush. But what I have done is I have created another GSM mono brush that basically is exactly the same mono brush, except I changed the streamline. And the difference between them is that if I go into the brush properties, and by brush properties I mean if you go into the brush menu and you click on the brush, it will bring up the brush properties. This is the brush studio. This is where you can edit your brushes. So you'll notice that one of the options, one of the properties is called streamline. And this allows the brush to be very smooth instead of it being shaky when you're drawing. So when I'm drawing, normally I have my streamline turned all the way to the max. And the reason why is because it allows me to have really smooth lines. But for my eraser, I prefer for the streamline to be very low, on about 10-11%. And the reason why is because when the streamline's all the way up, the brush moves a bit slower. But if you have the streamline all the way down, the brush will move very fast. And when you're erasing, obviously, you don't want the brush moving very slow. You want it to move quickly so that you can hurry up and erase. So all you have to do is go into your brushes and then swipe left on the brush that you want to become an eraser, and then you would just hit duplicate, and then it will duplicate the brush. Then you'll just go into the brush properties and turn the streamline down to about 10% and hit done. Layers are extremely important in Procreate because when you're creating something, let's just say I wanted to create a flower and I wanted to make the middle of the flower. So there's the middle of the flower. Now let's say I wanted to change the color and I wanted to create some petals around it. Now if I create the petals on the same exact layer with the middle of the flower, I'll just make my brush a little smaller. If I create it on the same exact layer, you'll notice that I can draw right on top of it, and I don't want that. Also, if I wanted to move just the petals and not the middle of the flower, I can't. I have to move them both together because they're exactly on the same layer. So I'm going to back up and I'm going to create a new layer. So I have created another layer and it's on top of the layer that is in that I created the center of the flower for. Now if I draw my petal, you'll notice that I can still draw on top of it. But if I grab my layer and I move it underneath the circle, you'll notice that it goes behind the circle instead. And then I can just close the floral and I'll be able to fill it. And if I want, I can move just the petal independently. So that's why layers are extremely important. And then on top of that, if let's say I created something and I didn't like it, or my client didn't like it and later on wanted me to remove it or do something different. If I created everything on the same layer, obviously the customer doesn't know anything about layers or anything like that. So, you know, they're asking you to make these changes and now you have to go back and create the entire piece over because they want you to just remove something small from it, but you can't remove it without erasing everything. But if you had put it on a separate layer, then you can just go back and just delete that one layer and it won't be a problem, and you're able to just make the changes just with that one layer. I'm going to create another layer and I am going to make that layer, I'm going to fill this entire layer. So if I wanted to draw just on this circle, I'm going to change my color. If I wanted to just draw on this circle, I'm in the circle layer and I tried to draw on it, and let's say I wanted to stay in the lines of the circle, I wouldn't be able to do it unless I go really, really slow. But with Alpha Lock, what it will do is, if I hit Alpha Lock, it basically takes the background away from that circle. So if I was to go in and start drawing on top of it, you'll notice that it respects the bounds of that box, and everything I draw on it stays inside of the circle, so it doesn't go outside the circle. Next, we're going to talk about clipping mask. And this method is basically the same thing as alpha lock, except it's a little bit better because it allows you to create layers. And obviously, like I explained before, layers are a bit better because you can make changes and move things around if you need to. So if you open up your layers and you hit the plus sign, which creates another layer, and on that layer, you click on it, the new layer created, and then you go down and you click on clipping mask. It comes up with this little arrow on the left-hand side pointing down. And basically, let's just think of clipping mask in the layer on top of the main layer, which is this circle here. Let's think of that layer as the child of this layer here. And when I say the child, I say that I mean that this layer basically has to respect the bounds of the circle. So just like alpha lock, if I draw, if I draw on top of this, you'll notice that it won't go outside the bounds of the circle. So it's basically respecting that circle. And you could make as many of those as you want. And all you would do is create another layer and hit clipping mask and just keep doing that. You can just keep doing it as many times as you want. So that's ways that you could create things and keep them inside of certain aspects of the artwork without ruining the pieces on the outer area. And those two methods are really important. I know that they can be a bit confusing because they were a bit confusing for me when I first started Procreate, and I kind of just left them alone for a while. But once I learned all about alpha lock and clipping mask, it became really a useful tool for me when creating my designs. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about colors. And if you go to the top right hand side, you'll see that there's a circle and it's colored in. And if you click on it, it comes up with a disc, a color disc. And obviously, I'm sure we're all familiar with color disc. You can just move the outer disc and change the hue. And then in the inside, you can change the color of around the color that you chose on the outside. So if you look on the bottom left-hand side of that menu, you'll see where it says disc, and then beside it, it says classic, and this is the classic view. And then it says harmony. And if you look at the harmony one, you'll notice that at the top it says colors and then it says complementary. Now, what's so awesome about this is that, let's say you wanted to create a leaf, and you wanted, or anything, it doesn't necessarily have to be a leaf, but you wanted to create something and you wanted to find a color that complements the color that you just chose. So if you select a color, there's another circle on the opposite side that is also being selected. And that is basically the complementary color to the color that you're selecting. So if you wanted to quickly find a complementary color to the color that you're selecting, that is a way that you can do it. There are also other ways that you can do it. By just hitting where it says complementary, you can do split complementary, and this will come up with 3. And then analogous, triadic, and then
tetradic. So there's a few different ways that you can do it. If you know a bit about color theory, then you recognize all of these things. But I'm not super good at color theory because I didn't pay attention in art when they were teaching color theory, but I know a bit about it, and I know enough about it to be able to choose colors properly. So beside the harmony, there's the value, and this is where you can mess around with the hue, the saturation, the brightness, and the RGB. So again, if you have an editing software like Adobe Illustrator or Coral or Silhouette, these are all things that you recognize: hue, saturation, brightness, RGB. Those are all things that you probably recognize that have to do with color. And then beside the value is palettes. And yours will look a bit different because I've created a bunch of palettes. But this is where you can create palettes. And Procreate gave us a wonderful update that allows us to create palettes using photos. And this is probably it definitely is a game changer for Procreate because it makes selecting colors for your artwork a lot easier. So if you click on the top right hand side here, there's a plus sign, and you'll notice where it says create new palette, new from camera, new from file, or new from photos. If you hit create new palette, it will just bring up an untitled palette that you can create yourself. And there's so many different ways that you can create a palette. You can just go to the color disc, select the color, go back to the palette, and then hit onto the palette, hit a square onto the palette, and it will put that color that you selected in your disc into the palette. Then you would go back into your disc, select another color, and then go back to the palette and then hit it. And then you can just keep doing this until you have a bunch of colors that you really like. So this is something cool to do right before you're about to do an art piece, and you want to select your colors. This is something really, really cool and good to do. So now that we know how to create palettes that way, I'll show you the game-changing way that Procreate has allowed us to do. So again, we're going to go to that plus sign in the palettes menu, and you can hit new from camera. And if you hit new from camera, you'll be able to take a photo. So let's say that you are somewhere where the sky is pink and blue and it's looking gorgeous and you're just loving the colors. You can take a photo of the sky and it will create a palette using the photo that you just took. If you hit new from file, you're able to click that and then go into your files from your iCloud drive or from Dropbox or your computer or something like that. And then below it is new from photos, and that allows you to grab a photo from your camera roll. So if I hit new from photos and I go to, let's say, my screenshots, and I click on this photo here that I saved, it basically created a palette using all the colors in that photo. So again, it's a real game changer because it allows you to create beautiful colors from photos without having to do it the old-fashioned way, which is the way I was showing you, where you go back to the disc, select the color, and then go back to palettes and hit it, and have to keep doing that a bunch of different times. So, and then if you don't like a few colors inside of the palette that was created from the image, you can just swap them out. You can just hold on to it and then hit a little menu pops up, and you can either hit delete swatch or set current color. So if I hit set current color, it's going to set that square, it's going to replace it with the color that I had chosen in the color disc. If I hit delete, obviously it's going to delete. So if I hit set current color, like I said, it's going to put the color that I had already selected in the disc. So that is a really, really fun way to create palettes. The way that you would be able to choose the palette is at the top right hand side. Because this one is already selected, it says default. But if it's not selected, like this one here, it would say set default. So above all of these palettes, it says set default. So if I hit set default and then I go back to the disc, you'll notice that below is that palette that I just set. So when I am drawing, I can just go back to it and select my colors just like that. So right now I have the GSM mono brush selected. And if I make a line and it's not so straight, let's say I make a line and it's not so straight. If I hold it at the end, it will make the line really straight. And let's say I wanted the line to go straight across. All I would have to do is put my finger down onto the screen and it will make the line straight across. And then if I move it, it will move it in a clock motion. So if you ever wanted to create, let's say, letters or create a perfect line so that you can use as a guide for lettering, this is a really fast way to do it, to create a nice little template. I'm going to back up. And then if I wanted to create a circle, you would do exactly the same thing. So I didn't create a perfect circle, but if I hold it at the end, it will create a perfect oval. But if I wanted it to be a perfect circle, again, you would just put your finger down onto the screen and it will create a perfect circle. And then you would just let it go, and now it created the circle. And then the same thing goes for creating other shapes like a square. So it created a square, but if I wanted it to be a perfect square, you just press down on it and it creates a perfectly symmetrical square. So let's see, another thing that is really cool to learn is filling the area of something that you drew. So first of all, in order to fill something, you have to make sure that the line is closed. If I created something and the line was open just a little bit, the circle was open just a little bit, and I tried to fill it, it's going to fill the entire area. So you have to make sure that the entire circle is closed or the square is closed. So if you wanted to fill it, you just drag the color. You just drag the color from the right hand top side and you just drop it into the circle. Something really cool that I learned recently is if I grab the circle, the color, and I hold it, you'll notice, and I drop it in, you'll notice that at the top something says color drop threshold 97.6%. So if I go downwards, it drops the threshold down, the percentage down. If I go upwards, it increases the threshold. So this is important. If you ever come across a situation where you are trying to fill a circle, let's do a circle, and you wanted to fill it. But when you go to fill it, you'll notice that on the outer edges, it's not quite filled. And if you were watching one of my previous classes, you'll notice that I was extremely frustrated because I did not know how to fix this. But after the class, a bunch of my students were like, this is how you fix it. So I thought that I would definitely share this with you because it's important. So if you notice that this is happening, that is because the threshold must be down. So in order to fix it, all you have to do is, I'm going to back up. All you have to do is when you drop the color in, you just increase the threshold. So when you go to drop it, don't let go of the screen with the pen. Hold it, and then the threshold menu at the top will come up, and you just increase it by swiping your pen across the screen. So I'm going to do it one more time so that I can bring it all the way up to about 90%. In order to delete, all you have to do is, there's a few different ways that you can delete. Obviously, one of the ways is by erasing, and that's going to the eraser, grabbing the brush, your designated erasing brush. A lot of people like to use mono brushes, like I said, or they go into the airbrush menu. They go into the airbrush menu and they grab, let's say, a hard airbrush, the hard brush. And then they like to grab this brush because it can get really big. So I have it at 100% right now, and you'll see how easy it is to just erase. Super simple. So that's one way that you can do it, obviously, with the eraser. Another way is by just taking your two fingers and just tapping on the screen. So if you tap on the screen, it will back up your last moves. And then another way, I'm going to just put that back on the screen. Another way is over here on the right hand side. There are these little arrows. And if you just tap on it and back it up, there's one that goes back and then there's one that goes forward. So you can tap that. But I find it easier to just tap my fingers on the screen, especially when you're trying to erase something quickly. Another thing, if you wanted to erase everything off of the screen, you would take 3 fingers and you would just swipe them like that. So I'm going to go back so you can see that again. You just take your 3 fingers and just rub them on the screen, and that erases everything on the screen. So when I figured that out, I was really excited because sometimes I want to erase something quickly, and when I figured that out, I thought like that was extremely cool. So another way that you could just delete everything off the screen is by just deleting the entire layer. So if you go to layers and you swipe left, you'll notice that there's something called, there's something in the menu that says clear. So if you hit clear, it clears the entire screen. Now, the reason why it wouldn't allow me to delete the layer is because it's the only layer that's here. So I know it looks like there's 2 layers, but one of them is the background color. So this technically doesn't count as a layer because this is just your background color. So I'm going to go back to my layers and I'll show you. If I create another layer, so now I have 2 layers, and I go and I swipe on layer 1, now instead of it saying clear, it says delete, and that's because I have 2 layers now. So if I delete it, there'll still be a layer left. But after I deleted that, if I swipe left on that one, it only says clear. So you have to have more than 1 layer in order to delete a layer, but if you only have 1 layer, you'll be able to clear the layer. Those are your ways that you can clear the entire screen. Now, let's get into a bit of the menu on the left-hand top side. So I want to show you how you can put guides onto the screen. So if you go to the toolbar, the little tool on the top left-hand side, and you go to where it says Canvas, you'll see that it has crop and resize, so you can crop and resize your piece, animation assist, drawing guide, which is what I want to show you, reference, flip canvas horizontally, flip canvas vertically, or canvas information. So if I go to drawing guides and I turn it on, as soon as I turn it on, it turns on the edit drawing guide menu here. And if I click on it, it comes up with a menu. You'll notice that when I turned on the drawing guide, it turned on this checkered screen onto my canvas. So that is basically the drawing guide. So if I go to drawing guide, you'll notice that the drawing guide menu pops up. And in this menu is a few different things. So you'll see that at the bottom it says 2D, grid, isometric, perspective, and symmetry. So if I click on each of these, it changes the grid. So if I wanted it on isometric, it changes the grid to these triangles. And then if I went to perspective, basically you'll notice that nothing is there. And the reason why is because you have to tap on the screen to create a vanishing point. So let's say I wanted to create the vanishing point over here. So that makes that creates the perspective. First you have to tap and create your vanishing point, and that creates the perspective. So you could also turn it, and I'll show you exactly what it does. So if I click on, at the bottom it says assisted drawing. So if I click on that and I hit done, and then I try to draw on it, you'll notice that it will snap to the lines. So this is only good if you want to create something with hard lines. So let's say you wanted to create a building or draw something that's going to have a lot of hard lines, then this is actually a really good tool to have. So let's back up and let's go back to our drawing guide, and let's change it a little bit. So I'm going to put it towards the middle, and I'm still in perspective. I still have my assisted drawing on. And if you don't want it to snap to the lines and you want to draw freely, you can. You just turn the assisted drawing off and it won't snap to the lines. Now I have the vanishing point in the middle, and now I can snap to the lines like this. So it's pretty simple. I haven't really found a need for it just yet, but for people who, like I said, want to draw things with hard lines, it's very good for them. So let's go back to the drawing guide. And then this is my favorite part of the drawing guides, and that's the symmetry. And the reason why is because you're able to draw things and them be symmetrical. So everything that you draw on this side will be on this side. So everything will be completely symmetrical. So after you hit symmetry, something will pop up down here that says options. So if I click on options, it has the guide options, and it allows you to change the way that you want it to work. So if you want it to work vertically, you would just keep it on vertical. If you want it to be horizontal, you click horizontal and it changes it horizontally. So everything I draw up here will be down here. You can change it to quadrant, which creates 4 pieces. So everything I draw in this box will be in all 4 boxes. And then the last one says radial, which is 8 triangles. So everything I draw on this one triangle would be in all of these triangles. So I usually just do like the vertical or the horizontal one. Sometimes I might mess with the quadrant, but these are really good for doing mandalas. And this is really great for us laser designers, because if you ever wanted to create a mandala and cut it out on the Glowforge, this is the perfect way to do it. So I have assisted drawing on, and I am going to hit done. And now if I grab my mono brush, change the size, and then if I start drawing, you'll notice that it draws on every single corner. So let me back up and I'll show you. We'll do a quick little mandala. So it makes making mandalas very easy. And super fun too. You don't have to be a professional to be able to do this. That's what is so fun about it. I mean, I am just, you know, doing random things, but you can do all different types of stuff. I mean, if I really sat here and tried to do it, I probably could do something really nice, but all right, so there's that. It's pretty fun to mess with, and you would probably enjoy it if you got to know it a little bit better. So next, I want to show you how you can move things independently if things are on the same layer. So earlier I talked to you about the importance of creating things on separate layers, but let's say that you created something on the same layer, but you don't want to move them together and you want to move them independently. So I'm going to just put, I'm going to grab my brush and I'm going to put 2 dots on the canvas. And one is a big dot and one is a small dot. So if I select my my pieces, my layer, and by selecting I mean going to the top hand side on the left and clicking on the arrow that selects everything in the layer, and I try to move it, they both move together. But if you look on the left hand side next to the arrow, there is this S shape in it. I believe it might be a measuring tape. If you click on that, a little menu will pop up at the bottom. And if you hit where it says freehand and you select just one of the circles, just draw a circle around it, and then hit the arrow tool, you'll be able to move just that circle around. So if you ever wanted to move something that was in the same layer, you would be able to still do that by freehanding a circle around it or selecting around it, and you'll be able to move it around. If we go back to that same menu with the S, the measuring tape, you'll notice there's a few different things in this menu. And another really important thing that you can do is, let's say that you wanted to duplicate only one of these circles instead of both of them. So if I wanted to duplicate both of them, what I would do is I would go to my layers, I would swipe left on that layer, and hit duplicate. And that will duplicate the layer. But if I only want to duplicate one thing in that layer, then what I would do is I would grab that S tool again, hit freehand, and I would just draw a circle around it. Then at the bottom, it says copy and paste. So I would just hit copy and paste, and that will copy and paste whatever I selected. So if I go and I hit the arrow, I'll be able to move around the piece that I just copied, and that puts it on its own layer. It creates another layer just with the piece that I copied. So once you do that, let's say that you wanted, you created something on the same layer. I created these two. I'm going to delete that copied one. Let's say I created these two on the same layer. Notice they're both on the same layer. And I want them on two separate layers. I accidentally did this and I want them on separate layers. Like I said, you would do the same thing. You would grab that S, select around it, hit copy and paste, go back to your layers, turn the layer off by hitting the check. So on each layer there's a check, and this turns the layer on and off. So if I turn it off, that turns off the layer that I just copied and pasted. Then I'll go to my eraser while I still have this layer selected. While I go to the eraser, I'll go to my layers and I'll select the layer with the two circles, and then I'll go to eraser, and then I'll just erase that circle while it's selected. Then I'll deselect it, and to deselect it, all you have to do is just either hit that measuring tape, the S, or hit the cursor, the arrow, and then deselect it and go back to the layers, turn on the layer that I turned off, which is the copied and pasted layer, and now I have both of those circles on its own layer. So instead of them being on the same layer and having to move together, they're on their own layers. If you look on the left hand side at the top, you'll notice the wand. And this menu is the adjustments menu. This is where you can mess with the hue, saturation, brightness, color balance, the Gaussian blur, and things like that. What makes this menu important is if you wanted to brighten something or if you wanted to blur something. This is necessarily important when creating something like stickers or doing like I'll show you quickly. I'll letter the word hello quickly, and if I wanted to create a drop shadow underneath the word hello, then I would create another layer, put that layer underneath the hello layer, and then I would just create, I'll create a few little lines underneath the hello. Then I would select that layer, make sure it's selected, go to the wand, which is the adjustment, and then I would hit Gaussian blur, and then I would hit you can either select layer or you could select pencil. If you select pencil, you'll be able to Gaussian blur with your pencil, or if you hit layer, you'll be able to mess with the entire layer and blur the entire layer. So the only thing that is in this layer is those little marks that I created at the bottom. So if I want to create a little drop shadow, I would just increase the Gaussian blur and then I'll be able to create a little shadow behind it. And that's it. So that is something cool that you could mess with if you wanted to create something like stickers or something like that, and create a little drop shadow behind your lettering or behind your art piece or whatever you wanted to do. But for laser usage and creating files, it's not necessarily something that we would use, because when it comes to creating files with the laser, you want, in creating files and having to vector them, you want your files to be as clean as possible. And in order to trace a file and create a file and vector it in Adobe Illustrator or any other editing software, your lines need to be very visible, very sharp, and pretty thick, so that the trace feature can pick up on those lines. So if you try to vector something like a blur, it would be very hard to vector that. I want to show you how you can do a time lapse. So let's say that you wanted to show people everything that you just did in a video. So what you would do is you would go to the menu, which is that toolbar. You would go to where it says video, and if you go to video, you'll notice it says time-lapse replay, time-lapse recording, and you can turn that on and off, and then export time-lapse video. So if you wanted to record a time-lapse, you want to make sure that you have the time-lapse recording set to on, which I always have it set to on, because I never know when I'm going to want to use that time-lapse video. Once it's done, you can hit time-lapse replay, and this will replay everything that you did during this session. So this is everything that we have done during the session of this video. So, and it's going pretty quickly. So it lasted 14 seconds, even though, you know, that was really a long time of me discussing Procreate. So if I go back to that menu and I go back to video, you'll notice it says export time-lapse video, and that is where you can export it and you're able to save it. So if you hit export time-lapse video, you can choose to export a full length, which is the entire thing, or just 30 seconds. So obviously, the 30 seconds is not turned on because that video is only 14 seconds. So if the video was more than 14 seconds, then I would be able to hit 30 seconds. But because it's not more than 30 seconds, it only allows me to hit full length. So I would hit full length, and then once I hit full length, it exports the video straight into my, well, actually, you can choose where you want to export it. So if you, like, right beside me is my phone. So if I wanted to airdrop it to my phone, then I would just hit airdrop, and one second, I would just hit airdrop, and then my phone would pop up and I would hit my phone and it would airdrop straight to my phone. If I wanted to just save the video to my camera roll, then I would hit save video. You can hit save to files, and that will save it to your iCloud, or save to Dropbox, which is something that I have explained to you guys time and again that is very important for you to download on your iPads. Dropbox is an app that allows you to save things to it, whether it be brushes, files, anything really, fonts, and you're able to import and export things from your computer to Dropbox, and then from Dropbox to your iPad to Dropbox, from Dropbox to your computer, especially if you don't have a Mac computer, to be able to just offload things straight to your Mac computer. So again, you're able to export that time-lapse file, and then you'll be able to upload it on your social media or wherever you want to upload it to. If you wanted to save, what you would do is you would go to that tool, and then you would go to where it says share. And when you, excuse me, when you go to share, you'll notice it says Procreate, PSD, PDF, JPEG, PNG, and TIFF. And then right below it, it has share layers. So the above menu is to share the image, one flat image, and then below it is share layers. So this allows you to save every single layer as a separate file. So if I was to hit share layers and then select one of these file extensions, then it would save each of those layers as a separate file. So I usually don't do that because it complicates the situation a lot more. And usually I have a lot more than 2 layers. Usually there's a lot of layers. So if I save in layers, then it will create a whole bunch of files and I would have to put them all together later on. So I just stay away from the share layer menu and I just hit share image. When I go to save my file, I always click PNG. And the reason why is because PNG file versus a JPEG file, a PNG file is always going to be a higher resolution file than a JPEG. So if you're vectoring, you definitely want the highest resolution all the time. So you definitely want to save under PNG. You could also save under Procreate, which let's say you wanted to save the Procreate file and then offload it onto another iPad. You can do that and then import that one into Procreate. I did that the other day when my iPad was dying and I really needed to complete something. I grabbed my daughter's iPad, I saved it in Procreate, and then I airdropped it straight to my daughter, her iPad, and then I was able to import that file right into Procreate and start working, pick up right back where I left off. So you can also save as a PDF, which is also useful, PSD. But like I said, for what we need it for, PNG is the way that you want to save it all the time. So when you click PNG, just like when you're exporting the time-lapse video, a menu pops up where you're able to export all these locations where you can export it to. So again, you can airdrop it. You can send it to someone, obviously. You can export it straight to Facebook, Instagram, or you can hit save image, which will save it straight to the camera roll, or you can hit save to files. So when I am saving my PNG file so that I can vector it, the way that I save it is I hit save to files, and this will bring up my iCloud drive. And my iCloud drive is basically everything that I have on my iCloud, everything I have on my computer, and everything I have on my MacBook Pro. And because I have a Mac computer and the MacBook Pro, it's very easy for me to save things and offload them straight to my computer. So once I bring up my iCloud, I'm able to just grab my desktop, hit my desktop, and then I'm able to just grab the folder that I always save into, hit that folder, and then hit save. If you wanted to create a new folder, you can just hit create a new folder up here, which is the folder with the plus sign, and then you can create a folder. We'll name it Procreate Work. Hit done. And then that creates a new folder. So then I can hit save. And now when I go to my computer, I'll notice that there's a new folder created on my desktop. And inside that folder will be a PNG file of this word hello. Another way that you can save is, again, I hit PNG. If you go down, you'll see it says save to Dropbox. And that I was explaining to you is another way that you can save. I highly recommend Dropbox. So if I hit save to Dropbox, it will bring up my Dropbox. Let me do that one more time. I don't know why it didn't give me, let's see, save to Dropbox. PNG and save to Dropbox. Okay, so I'm not signed into my Dropbox right now, so that's probably why it's coming up. But if I was signed into my Dropbox would be pulled up, and then all my folders inside of my Dropbox would be here, and I would be able to select a folder or create a folder and save it straight into that folder. Then I would be able to go to my computer, pull up Dropbox on my computer, and then I would be able to download the file very easily. And it's very simple to do, and it's very quick. Dropbox gives you, I think, I don't want to misquote it. So they give you a good amount of space for free, and then if you wanted more space, then you could purchase more space. But I've been using Dropbox for a couple years now, and I still have not purchased any additional space. So you know, they give you enough space, and I use it a lot for fonts and brushes in my files. So there you go. That's a full rundown of Procreate. I'm sure that I left out a few things, but you know, I'm always here to help you guys along the way. So if there is something that I left out and you want to know about it, just let me know and I'll answer all of your questions. And we're going to get into the second portion of our class. And that's going to be our hand lettering portion. So let's get into it. All right, so in front of me, I have my 12.9-inch iPad Pro and my second generation Apple Pencil. And I am in the Procreate app. So I have created a workbook just for you guys. And this workbook you will import into Procreate, and you'll be able to work on this workbook right inside the file. So right inside the canvas. So when you import it into Procreate, it will show up right inside of your gallery. You'll click on it and it will come up. So I'm just going to flip it horizontally and it will come up. So the first page that you'll see is the cover page, which says Modern Calligraphy 101, with some cute little leaves and florals and a few flourishes. If you go to the top right hand side and click on your layers, you'll notice that there are a bunch of different layers here. And there's no need to be alarmed. There's no need to be confused because I'm going to show you exactly how to use them all. So the first layer is obviously this layer here, and it is the front page, and they are all named. So it's very easy to skim through and know which layer is which. So this layer here is the intro, and it says intro. So when we are done looking at this layer, you would just hit the checkbox and that will turn the layer off. But it will keep the background color the same because the background color is set to blue. Next, we'll go to the next layer, which is lettering materials, and we'll turn that layer on. Then we'll close out our layers, and now we'll discuss the lettering materials. So if you open up the lettering materials, you'll notice all of your materials that I believe will create for a successful file designer. So, well, hand letterer, file designer, hand letterer. So obviously you need an iPad and an Apple Pencil. So every like I was saying earlier, every iPad being sold by Apple at the moment all use one of two of the Apple Pencils. If you have an older version of one of the 4 iPads currently being sold, just go to your settings, general, about to find out which generation you have and search to see if your iPad is compatible with the first generation Apple Pencil. The second generation Apple Pencil is only compatible with the iPad Pro 3rd generation and 4th generation, along with the new 2020 Apple Air iPad. So just see which one is compatible with which Apple Pencil and figure out which one best suits your needs. And then if you're buying an used iPad, just make sure that that iPad is compatible with one of the 2 Apple Pencils before you purchase it. Obviously, you're going to need the Procreate app. When I first started using Procreate, I had no idea what I was doing. I had already been drawing on paper for a while, but it was a whole new ball game. So it took some getting used to, but you know, after a few weeks of messing with it, you know, I already felt like I was a pro at it. So it just, you know, it takes some getting used to, but as soon as you learn where all the buttons are and you get used to all, you know, everything in the whole interface, it'll become, you know, very easy for you to maneuver. And then next you'll need the Procreate brushes that I have given you guys. So I've given you 2 brushes, and the first brush is called the GSM lettering brush, and then the second brush is called the GSM mono brush. So the script brush, you know, it goes from thin to thick to thin, and then the mono brush is just one consistent thickness and stroke. Now that we've gone through the lettering materials, we're going to move on. And if you go to your layers, you'll see that you can turn off that layer and go to the next layer, which is the anatomy. So now we're going to talk about the anatomy of calligraphy. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. So if you look, I have written out the word calligraphy. I have also numbered a lot of portions of the lines and the letters. So I wanted to break down the anatomy of calligraphy for you and tell you all about the proper terms that people use when referring to calligraphy, just so that you know what they mean. Now, I do want to say that I hand lettered for a very long time, and I didn't even know any of this stuff. So in order to be a good hand letterer, you do not need to know any of this craziness, you know? This is just if you really want to do the thing. Like if you really want to learn all about calligraphy, obviously it's good to know all this stuff. But you do not need to know all of this to create beautiful hand lettering and turn them into vectors and cut them out on your laser. This is just stuff that, you know, every hand letterer should, you know, find out and know at least once in their life, you know. So we're going to just go through it, and you'll probably forget it, but it's good to know. So first, I've labeled over here, which is this line, and that's number 1, this top line here. And that is the ascender line, aka the capital line. And the ascender line and the capital line, basically the ascender line is the top line where letters like lowercase b, d, h, k, l, etc., those letters reach their height. Sorry, let me go to that layer so it doesn't do that. That's where those type of letters reach their height. So if you look at letters like B, D, H, K, and L, you'll notice that all of them, we'll look at L here, they come up and they go straight to that top line there. But if you look at a letter like A, it doesn't reach that height. So those are called, that is the ascender line. So next is number 2, and that's this middle line here. And that line is called the waistline, also known as the mean line. So this line is between the baseline and the capital line, where lowercase letters like A, C, E, M, N, and O, etc., those letters reach their height. So if you look at this letter A, you'll notice that it goes from this bottom line to the waistline. So when you're writing those lowercase letters, that is where they all will stop. So it's a good guide to make sure that everything is nice and neat. So if you want all of your letters to reach the same height, it's good to have that guide behind it so that you can make it completely symmetrical and nice and even. So letters, all of the letters, like A, I, O, they'll all reach that height, including letters like G, P, all of those will reach that height. Next is number 3, and that's the baseline. That's the line that's underneath the waistline. So the baseline is basically where all of your letters will sit. So if you look at the entire word calligraphy, you'll notice that the entire word is sitting on the baseline. So bring your attention to the right-hand side. You'll see that I labeled it A for ascender, W for waistline, B for baseline, and D for descender, which we'll get to. So B is the baseline, and again, that's where all of the letters sit, whether they're capital letters or lowercase letters, they all sit on the baseline. Number 4 is over here, and that is the X height. So the X height is the space between the baseline and the waistline. So a lot of people sometimes call what we were calling the waistline, which is the middle line, aka the mean line. A lot of people call that line the X height line too. But technically, the X height is, like I said, the space between the baseline, which is the line that the letters sit on, and the waistline. So this space where this A is the X height. So it's the height that the lowercase letters like A, O, I, that's where they would reach the X height. So next is number 5, and that is right here. That's this bottom line here. And that is the D, the descender line. So it's like opposite. Ascender is the top, descender is the bottom. So descender line is the line where letters like F, G, J, P, Q, Y, Z, those type of letters. That's where those letters will reach the bottom. So if you look at the letter G, you'll notice that when the letter goes down, it reaches the descender line. If you look at the letter P, you'll notice that it reaches the descender line. And if you look at Y, it reaches the descender line. So if you want things to be really nice and neat, then you will stick to that guide. Next is number 6, and that's pointing to the capital letter here. So that is the majuscule. It's a weird word, and I'll show you here. Majuscule. In majuscule, even though it sounds like a crazy word, all it is another word for capital letter. So it's just another word for capital letter in calligraphy terms. Next is number 7, and that's pointing to the lowercase a, and that is minuscule. So it has the word mini in it, and we all know what mini means. And you guessed it, that just means lowercase letters. So that is the term for lowercase letters in calligraphy terms. So majuscule is capital letters and minuscule is lowercase letters. Next is number 8, and that is ascender. So earlier, number 1, we talked about the ascender line. So now we're going to talk about what an ascender is. So if you look at L, you'll notice, like I was telling you, you'll notice that number 8, the ascender, is pointing at the letters L, the letter L. And that's because this is an ascender. An ascender is any letter that reaches the ascender line. So letters like L or H or B, letters like that are all letters that reach the ascender line. So those are all ascenders. Next is number 9, and that's descender. So earlier we talked about the descender line. Now we're going to talk about what a descender is. A descender is all of the letters that reach the descender line. So again, letters like P, G, or Y, those are all descenders. They all have a descender. So that is basically the breakdown of calligraphy. It's pretty easy when you can remember all of these things, but it takes some getting used to. But if you create 4 lines and you label it A, W, B, and D, then you can remember what everything is and where everything goes. So if you can keep this anatomy in your head and this breakdown in your head, then you'll always have a really neat word. So now we're going to go to the next portion. And this is faux calligraphy. So the reason why I wanted to talk about faux calligraphy is because I noticed that a lot of you guys were having trouble with hand lettering. And I wanted to show you guys how you can fake it till you make it. So I named this Fake It Till You Make It because basically that's what you're doing. Essentially, that's what you're doing here. You're using any writing tool, but obviously in this case we're doing digital lettering, and we're going to fake it. So let's talk about what faux calligraphy is. So faux calligraphy, or also known as fake calligraphy, is a technique of imitating the look of calligraphy by using any kind of writing tool. But in this case of digital lettering, we'll be using the GSM mono brush. This brush has one consistent thickness in the stroke no matter how much pressure you put on the Apple Pencil. You write out your word, and as you write out each letter, you make all the downstroke's thick by creating another line beside the downstroke, then filling it in. So what I mean by that is, if you look at the word calligraphy that I wrote out here, if I zoom into the C, you'll see that if I zoom in just to these letters here, you'll see that I wrote out the entire word in one stroke. And then I basically created another line beside the stroke, beside the letter. And I only created this second line beside the initial line next to all the parts where I went downwards. So I'll show you an example. So I'm going to grab my GSM mono brush. I'm going to make my percentage about, let's see, about, we'll make it about 6 right there. And I have my guide right here. So I'm going to create the word, I'm going to write the word out that says call, just call. And I hope you guys can see this. So if I write the word call, you'll notice that it's just one consistent thickness. I'm going to back up. I'm going to write that one more time. And oh, I messed up. All right, so remember, we have to keep in mind all of our lines. So we have the ascender line, the waistline, the baseline, and the descender line. So we have to make sure that our letters sit on the baseline, and then our capitals reach the ascender line, and then our lower cases reach the waistline. So I'm going to start. And then these are ascender lower cases. So they'll reach the ascender line, which is the top line. There we go. So it's one consistent thickness. So if I used, let's say I was doing this on paper, you could actually do faux calligraphy with a regular pen or a regular pencil. Next, I'm going to grab the same brush, and I just made the brush a little bit smaller, and I'll draw a line beside it like that. And you'll notice that I'm only drawing a line where I went downwards. So here with the C, I'm going upwards, that would be thin, and then I'm going downwards, that would be thick, then I'm going back up, and that would be thin again. So in this case, thin, thick, thin. So I'm only going to put this line next to where I would want the letter to be thicker. Same thing with the A. I'm going to put the thickness here. And then this was also a downstroke, so that one has to be thick also. And then this is the downstroke. And then all those other parts are upstrokes. Then I'll just take it and I'll fill it in, just like that. And after I fill it in, you'll notice that you won't be able to tell the difference between real calligraphy and faux calligraphy because it looks very similar. It looks very similar, especially if you do it correctly. So, like I said, you can fake it till you make it, and you'll be able to do calligraphy by just using faux calligraphy. So, you know, I created the entire template for you guys, so you guys can just go in and practice if you want. Sorry. I'm going to just back up. All right, so you guys can go ahead and just practice if you want, but make sure that you are not writing on this layer here. You want to make sure that you're writing on a different layer. So if you wanted to practice on this layer, on these lines, then you would just go ahead and create a layer and then make sure that layer is on top of the layer you want to practice. And make sure that you have that layer selected, and then you can go ahead and just practice right on that layer. And then after you finish practicing, you can either just I'll show you. Let's say I just finished practicing, and after I'm done, I can just delete that layer if I want, or I can just turn that layer off, and then I can create another layer and do it all over again. Next, we're going to turn off that layer and we're going to go into brush lettering, and we're going to talk all about brush lettering. So brush lettering is obviously a bit different from faux calligraphy because brush lettering allows you to get thick and thin strokes just with the same brush or the same pen. So brush lettering is basically a series of thick and thin strokes using a brush pen. But in the case of digital lettering, you use a Procreate brush that has sensitivity to pressure. The GSM lettering brush is perfect for brush lettering since it has the properties that make up the thin and thick strokes upon pressure. So if you look at this little page that I created, you'll see where I have, let me zoom out a little, or I'll just move this up. You'll see that I have a lowercase a, the anatomy of a lowercase a, and then the anatomy of an uppercase a. And I show you exactly how to do them both. So I'm just going to create another layer so that I can write on top of it. And I'm going to show you. So with brush lettering and using a proper brush lettering brush, which is the GSM lettering brush, or any brush that is sensitive to pressure. So when I say sensitive to pressure, I'm going to select my GSM lettering brush. If I put no pressure on it, the line is thick. The line is thin. If I put heavy pressure, the line is thick. So depending on how much pressure you put on the brush, you're able to get different variations of the brush. And that is what makes up brush lettering, thin and thick strokes. So I'm going to put my brush on 20%, so you can put your brush on 20%. Make sure that you have another layer created so that you're not writing on this layer. So I want to bring your attention to the lowercase a here. And I have broke down the lowercase a into steps. And I wanted to show you this to show you how thin and thick strokes work. So if you look at step 1, you'll notice that the arrow is pointing up. So remember, every time you go upwards, it's little to no pressure. So when I'm going up, I'm putting, let me grab my pen. And I'm making sure that I have my GSM lettering brush selected. I'm going to put the brush size down to about 12%. And then every time I go upwards, I'm putting little to no pressure on my pen. The next step is the oval. So step 2 would be little to no pressure here. Thick pressure going down is step 3. And step 4, little to no pressure going up. So I'll show you in fast motion. Like that. The next step is step 5 and 6. And it's heavy pressure going down and little to no pressure going up. So all together, it would look something like this. Light pressure, heavy pressure, light pressure, heavy pressure, light pressure. I'm going to bring your attention to the next part, and this is how we can become better letterers, and that is a simple answer: by building muscle memory. So in order to build muscle memory, I'll tell you what muscle memory is. Muscle memory is a form of procedural memory that involves consolidating a specific motor task into memory through repetition, which has been used synonymously with motor learning. So that's basically the real definition of what muscle memory is. But let's break this down in English, please. So basically, it means building the muscles in your hands by repeating practice drills to enhance the stability so that your words are not so shaky and your transition from thick to thin and vice versa in your letters is smooth. So basically, it's doing the same thing over and over and practicing so that you can get it right. That's what it means, building muscle memory. So I'm going to show you a few basic strokes that build muscle memory. So the first one is a downstroke, and that looks just like this. And that, remember, every time you go down, it's thick. When you go up, it's light. It's little to no pressure. So thick pressure, little to no pressure. Thick going down, thin going up. So a downstroke would obviously be thick pressure. So the way you would do it is you just do thick pressure. That's it. Next is an upstroke. So how do you do it? Little to no pressure going up, little to no pressure going up. Next is combined downstrokes and upstrokes. So if you look at it, you'll notice that it's a combination of both of those strokes. All it is a U. It's basically a U, and one side has a thick stroke and the other side has a thin stroke. But you have to do it in a certain way. When you go down, heavy pressure, and go back up with light pressure. And you'll notice that my hands are a bit shaky too. And what prepares me for before I'm about to letter a piece is I start doing these practice drills and practicing my strokes to get my muscle memory moving again. Because if I don't hand letter for a while, I lose my muscle memory. So we'll do that one more time. Thick to thin, just like that. Next is continuous downstrokes and upstrokes. So it's basically the same thing as the combined, except you're not picking up your pen in between. So you're just continuously going. So it looks something like this. So every time you go down, you're doing thick, thin going up, thick going down, thin going up. And that builds muscle memory so that when you're doing letters that involved thin and thick strokes in one swoop without picking up your pen, you'll be able to do that. Like, for instance, something like an O. So if I do an O, it's thick to thin and then back to thick and back to thin. So in order to do something like this, you have to build that muscle memory, and doing practice strokes like this help you build that. The next one is an ascender. So an ascender, remember, is any letter that reaches the top line. So if you look at this stroke, you'll notice that it looks like the beginning of what an L would look like, or what a B would look like, or how about what, let's see, about what a D would look like if I did something like this. So a lot of these strokes are made up of, a lot of these letters are made up of these basic strokes. The next one is a descender, and that one obviously looks kind of like a J, or how about a P, right? Or let's see, how about how about a Y, right? So all these practice strokes are identical to what we're actually going to be lettering. The next one is a rounded stroke. And obviously this is important because there's a lot of letters that have this rounded stroke, like A, O, D, B. So the rounded stroke is, you always start it on the right hand side, going upwards, then downwards, then back to upwards. So the reason why I don't really like starting it on the right hand side is because if you start it on the right hand side, it makes it harder to go back down thick and it ends up being two different thicknesses here. If you start it on this side, it makes it a bit easier to go back in thin. So, or you could start it towards the top. Excuse me, start it towards the top and do something like this. So it's up to you how you want to do it, as long as you accomplish it. So now that we talked about building muscle memory, we're going to go ahead and talk about some practice drills and try some practice drills. So if you look at these practice drills here, you'll see that all of these practice drills are basically all the basic strokes that we just talked about in the previous page. So this is what's going to help you build that muscle memory. So make sure that you have the proper brush selected, which is the GSM lettering brush. And then make sure that you created a blank layer for you to practice on, so that you're not writing directly onto this layer. Make sure that your brush size is put down. So I think putting it down to about 8% would suffice. And then we're going to start with some downstrokes. So the downstrokes are just heavy pressure for heavy pressure for thick line. So you just put that heavy pressure. Next is the upstroke. And the upstroke is obviously little to no pressure, like we discussed before. Next is the combining of the downstroke and the upstroke. So it's heavy pressure transitioned into light pressure. So heavy pressure transitioned into light pressure. Heavy into light. It's funny because I've been hand lettering a while now, and I find it hard to write in cursive because I find myself wanting to hand letter instead of write in cursive. So anytime I have to sign something or write something, it always takes me forever because I can't help but to pick up my pen after every stroke. And as you start to hand letter, you'll start doing the same exact thing. The next one is continuous downstrokes and upstrokes. So it's heavy pressure into light, and then you repeat without lifting your pen. The next one is the ascender loop. And this is starting with the upstroke of the small loop and then go into the thicker downstroke. And then you work your way up light and then go down thick, like that. Light into thick. The next one is the descending loop. And that is the loop that is the one that touches the bottom line for letters like G, Y, Q, and Z. So the descending loop, the descender loop, is starting with heavy pressure, the downstroke on the right, then go into the small loop with little to no pressure towards the left, going upwards. So you'll see I'm going to go down heavy and go upwards light. Down heavy, upwards light. The next one is the circles. So starting on the left-hand side on the upstroke into the thick downstroke on the right-hand side, then back up to the left-hand side. Excuse me, I said it completely wrong. Starting on the right-hand side, I even wrote it wrong, I believe. Starting on the right-hand side on the upstroke into a thick downstroke on the left-hand side, and then go back up on the right hand side with little to no pressure. So I'll show you. We're going to go up with little to no pressure, down, and then back up, just like I taught you on the previous page. Next is the last one, and that's the C rounded stroke. So starting on the right hand side, going up with little to no pressure, back around towards the left and down with heavy pressure, then back up with little to no pressure and stopping before the connection. So just like you're writing a C, little to no pressure, heavy, and then back up. We're going to turn this layer off, and we're going to go into the practice drills 2. So I'm not going to go through this practice page with you, but I'll show you quickly. It's the same exact strokes, and what you're going to do is you're going to do it on your own without a shadow in the background to help you, a guide in the back. We're going to move on, and we're going to go into the lowercase alphabet. Now, when you go into the lowercase alphabet, the one that says lowercase alphabet, you'll notice that it's different from the others. And what makes it different is it has a drop-down box, an arrow on the right-hand side. So if you click that arrow, you'll notice that an entire menu pops up, and there's a menu of layers. So in these layers are all these different practice worksheets that I have put in here for you. So all you have to do is open up that layer, go down to the one that says A through E, turn that layer on, and then make sure that you create a new layer so that you're not practicing directly onto that layer. And now you can practice A through E. So let's do it. I have broke down each letter perfectly for you guys to show you exactly how to letter each letter. So again, make sure you have your GSM lettering brush selected. Make sure that you put the brush down to about 6%, and let's do it. So I have made the lines, all 4 lines here. So there's the ascender, the waistline, the baseline, and the descender line. So each letter has those 4 lines. So you can choose to obey those lines, or you don't have to. So let's do it. So here's A. And we're going to look at the breakdown of A. I know that we did a bit of it before, but we're going to look at it again. So with A, remember our practice strokes, our basic strokes, are basically the anatomy of all these letters. So in other words, they're the bones of these letters. So if you practice those practice strokes, then you'll be able to do every single one of these letters effortlessly. So with A, you'll notice that this looks just like the circle stroke. So starting on the right hand side, you go up with little to no pressure, thick pressure going down, and then little to no pressure going back up. And then the second stroke is thick pressure going down and little to no pressure going up. And you'll notice that that looks like the downstroke and the upstroke combined, with the upstroke not going all the way up. So you'll notice that these are basically already what you learned. So we are gonna do the A. So we're going to do our A, and remember, thin, thick, thin, and then back to thick. And remember I said it's different from cursive because after every stroke, you don't just keep going. You pick up your pen and then you go to the next stroke. So it's thick and then up to thin. I'll show you again. Thick and up to thin. So if I was doing regular cursive, I would make my A like this. Like that, right? But with calligraphy, you want to take your time so that you know exactly where your strokes are going to go. So the A goes like that. You stop, pick up your pen, and then you go with the downstroke going up like that. And then you continue and go along and create a few more and practice all the way down. Next is the letter B. And again, I broke down the letter for you perfectly. You just go down with a thick stroke, then you go up with a thin, and then back down with a thick. And then starting over here, you're going to come and do a swoop going up. So I'll show you what it looks like all together. Let me just zoom out a little. Thick going down, thin going up, thick going down, and then the swoop going up. Just like that. Then we can go again. Thick going down, thin, thick, thin. Another way that you can letter the letter B, this is an easy way to do it, but another way is by using one of our basic strokes, which is the ascender stroke. The ascender stroke. Ascender basic stroke. So you would just start with that ascender stroke and then just like that. So there's a few ways that you can do it. You could also start down here, come up, bring it down, which is also basically like the ascender stroke, except you're starting the line on the outside and then bring it up and come around. Next is C, and that one is pretty simple because this is one of our basic strokes that we have learned. You go up, thin, thick going down, thin going up. Very simple. Thin, thick, thin. Thin, thick, thin. Next is D, and this one is very similar to the B, but backwards. Instead of starting with the thick downstroke, you're going to start with the circle instead. And it's basically exactly what an A would look like, except the second part starts at the ascender line. So you start here with thin, thick going down, thin going back up into a circle, stop, and then thick going down. So I'll show you what that looks like all together. Just like that. Thin going up, thick going down, thin going up, thick going down, thin going up. Next, we'll do it again. And then just like the letter B, there's different ways that you could letter the letter D. So you can start with the circle, stop it here, and then bring up a loop and come down just like that. Next is the letter E. And you're starting, it's kind of like doing a mini ascender basic stroke. So you're starting here, going up with a light stroke, then back down with a thick, and back up with a light. I'll show you what it looks like all together. Here we go. Now let's move on, and we'll go to F through J. So now that we done the A through E, select the one that says F through J, and then make sure that you turn on the layer by checking it. Next, you're going to hit the plus sign and create a layer on top of it. And this is going to be what you're going to practice on. So you don't want to practice on the layer that has the worksheet on it. Just follow each step one by one, and always remember, when you're going up, when the arrow is pointing up, it's thin. When the arrow is pointing down, it's thick. Next is the G. And again, it's reaching the descender line. And then the top of it is reaching the waistline. Next is the H. And if you notice, it has the ascender loop here. Like that. Remember, we practiced those. So we start like this. We do our loop. Going down. And then up. Like that. Or you can do it simple, like this. Straight down. Go up, straight down. Next is the letter I, and that one's simple. Again, it's just like the strokes that we practiced already. Next is the J, and that goes up, light, thick down, then up, and then the dot at the top. So it goes up, thick down, just like that, and it's reaching from the waistline to the descender line. Next, we're going to get into the next portion of our letters, and that is K through O, and let's go through those. Notice that after every stroke, I'm picking up my pen and I'm going. Next is L. And just like L, just like the other letters, you can letter L differently. You can do it straight down and then up, like that. That's actually one of my favorite ways to letter it, just like that. Next is M, and you'll notice that M is basically the same thing as the continuous upstrokes and downstrokes. So if you look at the anatomy of it over here, you'll notice that it's just a bunch of upside down U's. So we'll start here. And we'll just keep going. Just like that. Next is the letter N, and it's exactly like the letter M. Next is the letter O, and this one is just like we practice with our basic strokes. We start here, go around, and then we just do a swash like that. Now the O is unique because there's so many different ways that you can do it. This is an easy way, but another way that you can do it is by making the circle like that and then doing a loop like that. Or you can start down here, thick, thin, back to thick, and over. We're going to move on to the next page, and then we're going to create a new layer so that we can write on the new layer instead. So the P is the descending loop, the practice stroke, and then kind of like a circle. So if you look at the anatomy, it's pretty simple. It starts with the thick stroke, up with the thin, up with the thin, down with the thick, and then starting at this point, you'll bring over that swash. So we'll do it all together. Thick, thin, thin, thick, thin. You can do the P this way and just bring it down like that, and then start down here and bring it up like that. Next is the Q, and you start with the circle, go down with the thick, up, and then the swash. Next is the R, and the R can be done in different ways, depending on if you're starting with an R or if you are going into the R in the middle of a word. You go up, thin, back thin, thick, excuse me. So you go up, thin, back down thick, stop. And then you're going to go across here, thin, and then down thick and up thin. So we'll do that all together. Just like that. Another way that you can do it is bring the line up, stop, do a thick stroke across, go down and up. Now let's go to the next letter, which is S. And we're going to go up, thin, and then come down with a swoop, and then back up. Up, swoop, back up. The letter T starts like that, thick going down, thin going up, and then like that. You don't have to do it like this. You can do it like this if you want. You can do it like this. You can do it all different ways like that. It's up to you. So I create another layer to write on, and up here we're going to start with U. Thin, thick, thin, thick, thin. And by now you guys have already gotten used to thin and thick strokes, hopefully. So this one is pretty simple. You could also deep six this right here and just settle for this like that. Here is the V. And of course, you don't have to start it like this with this line here. You can just bring it down just like that. And you don't even have to do that twirl there. You can go like this. Next is W. And it's kind of similar to V. Next is X. I love lettering the letter X. So you just do that. And then you go up with a thin stroke. up with a thin stroke. So thin, thick, thin, thin. Next is the letter Y. Very similar to the X. If I was to add that, it would be an X. But instead, we're going to add a descender. And it goes down to the descender line. Next is the letter Z. So the letter Z starts out with a thin stroke into thick, and it stops in between the waistline and the baseline. Then it starts up again, thin, back to thick, down to the descender line, and looped up. So we'll do that in fast motion. Just like that. You can start it down here and bring it up, or you can start it in between the waistline and the baseline. We just got through all of our lowercase letters, and I'm going to turn those layers off, and you'll notice that the last layer I have a blank slate for you. In here you can practice all of the lowercase letters that I just taught you. If you want to write a few words all in lowercase, you can do that. Or you can just write your letters out A through Z one at a time. It's up to you. So I'll leave that up to you. I'm going to turn those layers off, and we're going to go into our uppercase alphabet. And we're going to get right into it. I'm not going to break down each letter like I did with the lowercase ones, because like I told you before, I have broke down each and every letter for you by numbers. So if you look at these numbers, you'll notice that they are perfectly broken down. And it is pretty simple to figure out. So just watch my hand motions, and even if you need to rewind this, or if you want to ask me any questions about it, you can go ahead and do that, and I'll help you guys along the way if you feel like you need a little bit of extra help. So let's start. Next is the letter B. We're going to go down, thick, thin, up, back down thick. Then we're going to lift our pen, up thin, down thick, and back up thin. All right, next is the letter C. Up thin, thick, thin. Next is the letter D, and it goes down thick, up, thin, down thick. Next is E. Up thin, down thick, a bit thin, down thick, and then up thin. Next is the letter F. Starts thick, thin, thick, thin. Next, we're going to get into our next set of letters, and that is G through L. And we're going to start with G, thick, thin, back down to thick, back up to thin, thick, and then back up to thin. And I'll make a few more for you. Oop. Next is the letter H, and we're going to start here, thin, thick to thin, and then we're going to go from here, from this point, and we're going to go down and then come across. So if you look at the anatomy of it, you'll notice thin, thick, and then you start here, bring it down, and then back over. So I'll show you again. Here, like that, and then we're going to start over here, like that. Next is J, up thin, down thick. Just like that. You could round it out a little bit more if you want to make it more like a J. Like that. Next. Oh, I don't know why. I'm so silly. This is not the J, this is the I. That goes to tell you I'm a bit tired. Alright, let's go through this one again. This is the I. So, the reason why I got confused just now, even though I know my alphabet, is because usually the I is done this way. Like this. Like that. So, I got confused a little bit, but this is another way that I like to do my eyes. So I did it this way to show you guys this is actually the original way that you're supposed to do it. So let's start again. There we go. Or you can do it like that. And this one looks like a letter J. You start here, you come around, go down, and loop it. And loop it. Next is the letter K, one of my favorite letters to hand letter. And it starts like this with an upstroke to a downstroke, back up to an upstroke, downstroke, loop, downstroke, and back up to an upstroke. When you're doing this downstroke here, you want to try not to do it as thick as this downstroke. So here we go. But you want to do it thick, but not as thick as this one here. Next is L. I really do not enjoy hand lettering the letter L. So let's start. We'll start here, up, thick, and then thinner. Again, We're going to get into the M through R. M is one of my favorite letters to hand letter. So you start here, downstroke, upstroke, up, thick, down, up, thin, thick, down, up, thin. Put it all together and what do you get? Next is the letter N, and it's done exactly the same way. Next is O, and you start heavy, up thin, back down heavy. Just like that. Next is a uppercase P, and that starts exactly the same way as the M and the N, like that, and then like that, and then starting here in this area you come across, and it looks like this all together. Next is Q, and the Q you just do your circle and then your swash. So let's start it and then the swash. Next is the letter R, and just like the M, the N, and the P, it starts exactly the same. Stop, stop. There we go. So it's very simple. Next, we're going to turn those layers off, go S through X, create a new layer on top of it to write on. And here's our uppercase S. It's pretty simple. Next is the letter T. And we start off with the top part and then go down with the bottom. So start with the top, down with the bottom. So the camera cut out just a little bit, so I apologize if you missed a few of these letters. But like I said before, the instructions in the beginning of the letters are pretty good, so you'll be able to go through each letter step by step and be able to figure it out on your own if you did end up missing some of it. So I'm going to go back to the U, and we're going to do a few more of those before we move on to the V. And again, that's pretty simple. Just goes from a thin to a thick, and then back up to a thin, and then back down to a thick, and then of course back up to a thin. The V starts at a thick, up to a thin, back down to a thick, and then kind of swooped over, and it, you know, fans back out into a well, not fans out, but dwindles back into a thin stroke. Next is W, and basically it's like doing two U's, so thick, thin, thick, thin, thick. I'll show you what that looks like all together. Next is X, and the X is done almost exactly the way that the X is done with the lowercase. Thin to thick to thin, and then up thin. And we're going to go up to those two last letters, and we're going to start on our Y. So I'll show you the breakdown. Thin, thick, thin, and then thick, thin. And I'll show you what it looks like all together. And notice that when I'm doing it, I'm not bringing the Y, the curve of the Y all the way down to the baseline. And that's because if I bring it all the way down to the baseline, then it will kind of look weird, because there's not much room between the baseline and the center line. So it's best to end it 3/4 of a way down to the baseline. So about right there. Like that. Oh, like that. Next is the letter Z, and that one's pretty simple. Thick, thin, thick. So it's all about how much pressure you're putting on the pen, you know. So next, we're going to try that again. I'm going to try it again. The Z is really a fun one to do to get used to pressure, going from thin to thick. So if you practice with the Z, I bet you'll get really good at going from thin to thick and thin and thick to thin. All right. Now next, I have these two words here, and these two words are amazing for practicing. The first word is minimum, and the second word is wonderful. Minimum makes for a really good word to practice, and I'm going to flip my iPad. I'm going to turn this, and I'm going to make it bigger. Now, the reason why I think minimum is a perfect word to letter is because there is so many under and up strokes, thin and thick strokes, and they go a lot of underturning and overturning. And this is what lettering is all about. So it's a perfect word to practice with. So we're going to do this. Oh, let me make sure that I flip the iPad. I'm going to just thicken my brush a little bit. I'm going to put it on about 9%. And notice, after every stroke, I'm picking up my pen and I'm continuing. All right. Now, you'll notice that there is an empty line here for you, and I want you to write out the word minimum by yourself. Next is the word wonderful, and this one is perfect because there's a lot of under and over turns plus a few rounds, circles. So now that we got through that, I'm going to flip my iPad once again. And then I am going to close this layer out. And I'm going to open the last layer. And in this last layer, after the uppercase alphabet, you'll notice it's a blank layer, just like I did after the lowercase alphabet. And I want you to practice all of your uppercase alphabets on this blank layer. Once you do that, you'll notice that the very last page, it says a few words. And these are just a few words to get your muscle memory going and practice all of the letters and the strokes that we learned. So the top says start. The second line says learn. Connect, reflect, butterfly, and modern. So just go through these, hand letter them, and there's not much room beside it to hand letter the word again on some of them. But for start, you can definitely hand letter start beside it. Learn, you may be able to. And that's probably it. But even though you can still hand letter at least half the word beside it. So make sure that you add a new layer so that you can practice on the open layer, on the blank layer. And just start. And take your time and do it nicely. When I take my time and I do it really nice, it comes out really good. When I rush, that's when it comes out all jumbled. All right. Then you're just going to keep on going all the way down until you get to the last word. And even if you want to do it again and hide the layer that you practice on and create another one and try it again, you can do that. But just go through all the words and practice. And you'll have this workbook for yourself, so you can choose to do it over and over again. And you have this video to accompany you along the way. So I hope that you enjoyed the lettering portion of this class. And I hope you know that I have some really fun things in store for you. I decided to leave out the finished lettering portion and leave that for the end because after we do our floral portion of the class, which is the second class, we're going to get into, at the very end, we're going to do a full project where we put our florals that we drew and hand letter something beautiful and put them together. And then the third class will be taking that beautiful finished project and we'll be vectoring it in Adobe Illustrator. And once that's done, then we'll be able to cut it out on the Glowforge and see what it looks like. So I decided to leave out the finished hand lettering piece for the very end, since this part of the course did take quite a long time. But I wanted to be able to cover all my bases with you guys. So I hope that you enjoyed it. I know that it's a long one, even if you have to break it into a few different sit downs to watch. That's okay. But I told you guys that it was going to be a long course, and that's why I wanted to break it down into sections by weeks. So you have a whole week to watch this course. So thank you so much for watching the first portion of this course, and I hope to see you guys next week. And thank you so much for watching.